Welcome to my YouTube channel. Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe and tap the bell icon. The laughter of the socialites echoed through the grand hall, mixing with the clinking of crystal glasses. The opulent chandeliers above cast a warm glow over the crowd, illuminating the gilded walls adorned with priceless art. The floor was polished to perfection, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes. It was a world of wealth, power, and status, an elite playground where only the chosen few were allowed to play. Isabella stood near the center of the room, her gaze drifting over the display of rare, exquisite items that would be sold to the highest bidder. But she wasn't here for the art. No, tonight she was part of a spectacle, an accessory to her husband's wealth and stature. It wasn't her world, and she knew it. She had always known it. Yet, there she was, standing in a simple, yet elegant, navy blue gown, trying her best to blend in. Her heart beat faster as the whispers of the women around her reached her ears. "Who is she?" one of them asked, their voice dripping with disdain. "I thought the invitations were for the elite," another muttered. "Does she even belong here?" Isabella didn't need to turn around to know they were talking about her. The women's eyes burned into the back of her neck, their judgment slicing through the air. She could feel the weight of their stares, each one a silent accusation, a question of why she was in their midst. A girl from a small town, a woman who had climbed her way up through marriage to a billionaire, yet still didn't quite belong. Isabella's husband, Peter, was across the room, engrossed in a conversation with another high-powered individual. He stood tall, his sharp suit making him look every bit the part of the rich, powerful man he was. His charm was effortless, and his confidence was contagious. He had worked hard to get to where he was, but he had always belonged to this world. She hadn't. He was a man made of wealth, while she was just a woman who had learned to wear the title of wife, as if it were the most important thing about her. But tonight, she felt smaller than ever before. The auctioneer's voice broke through her thoughts. "Ladies and gentlemen, we begin the evening with a truly unique item. A rare painting from the 18th century, created by one of the finest artists of the time," he announced, waving his hand toward a velvet-draped pedestal. A round of murmurs spread through the crowd as the artwork was unveiled. Isabella's eyes shifted toward Peter. She caught his gaze, and for a split second, she saw something in his eyes, something unfamiliar. It was a flicker of discomfort, almost like a warning. But before she could make sense of it, a woman approached her with a wide, practiced smile. "Is that your husband?" the woman asked, her voice loud enough to ensure that everyone around could hear. Isabella turned to face her, forcing a smile onto her lips. "Yes, that's Peter," she replied, keeping her tone steady. The woman's smile widened, but it wasn't kind. "How charming," she said, her eyes scanning Isabella's gown. "Though I must admit, I thought the guests tonight were expected to have a bit more flair." Isabella felt her face flush. She had been prepared for the comments, the stares, the whispered insults that seemed to follow her wherever she went, but hearing them aloud, from a woman who clearly saw her as nothing more than an ornament beside her wealthy husband, made her feel small. "Isabella, darling," Peter's voice suddenly called out, and Isabella turned to find him walking toward her, his face a mask of politeness. "Come, we should take our seats. The auction is about to begin." His arm slipped around her waist, guiding her through the crowd. But even as he touched her, his movements were stiff, almost mechanical. She could feel the distance between them, a space that had begun to grow over the past few months, and tonight it seemed more pronounced than ever. They made their way to a table near the front, but as they sat down, Isabella's gaze remained fixed on Peter. His smile, his polite laughter, it all seemed so rehearsed. And yet, something about it felt empty, detached. She couldn't explain it, but she felt as though something was off. She had learned to recognize the signs, his sudden bouts of silence, the way his eyes would wander as if seeking something, or someone, in the room. The anxiety was always there, simmering just beneath the surface, and tonight it was almost tangible. As the auction continued, the room seemed to grow warmer, more suffocating. Isabella's discomfort increased with each passing moment. The socialites around her were discussing numbers in millions, throwing bids out like they were nothing more than coins in a fountain. But Isabella wasn't focused on the art, she was focused on Peter. His behavior was becoming more erratic by the minute. "Peter," she whispered, leaning in closer to him. "Is everything okay?" He didn't immediately answer. His eyes were locked on the auctioneer, and for a brief moment, Isabella could have sworn she saw him flinch when the man announced a bid that far exceeded the price anyone had anticipated. "Peter," she pressed again, her voice low, but insistent. He turned to her, his eyes filled with something that looked almost like fear. His lips parted, but before he could speak, a voice interrupted them. "Peter, is that your wife?" a woman called from behind them. Isabella didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Victoria, one of the most infamous socialites in the city, stood behind them, her blonde hair falling in waves over her shoulders. She was everything Isabella was not: polished, sophisticated, and as cold as the diamond necklace draped around her neck. Her eyes scanned Isabella, her gaze lingering a bit too long on her gown, as though trying to decide whether it was worth her attention. "Yes, this is Isabella," Peter said, his voice strained. "Isn't she wonderful?" The way he said it made Isabella's heart twist. There was no real warmth in his words. It was as though he were talking about a prized possession, not the woman he had married. She forced herself to smile, but the words felt like daggers in her chest. Victoria's laughter rang out, harsh and unkind. "Wonderful," she said, as though tasting the word on her tongue. "She doesn't exactly fit in, does she?" Isabella's breath caught in her throat. She had heard the whispers, the ridicule, but hearing it out loud from someone like Victoria made her insides churn with humiliation. Peter didn't respond. He just reached for Isabella's hand and tugged her gently to her feet. "Let's go, Isabella," he said, his voice tight. "We're leaving." The words felt like an order, not a suggestion. As they walked toward the exit, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Peter's demeanor was all wrong, tense, on edge, as though he were running from something. She couldn't understand why. Outside, the cool night air hit her like a slap in the face. The car was waiting, sleek and black, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Peter opened the door for her, but as she slid into the back seat, she noticed the way his hands trembled just before he closed the door. The drive was quiet, unnervingly so. Isabella glanced at Peter, his face set in stone, his jaw clenched. She wanted to speak, to ask what had happened, but she knew better than to press him when he was in this mood. Finally, as they approached their home, Peter broke the silence. "I didn't want them to know," his voice was barely a whisper. Isabella's heart skipped a beat. "Know what?" she asked, her voice shaking with the weight of unspoken questions. Peter's eyes darted to her, his face a mask of confusion, anger, and fear. She wasn't sure, but something in his expression made her stomach twist. "The truth," he said quietly, as if it pained him to say it. "The truth about us, about me." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. She had no idea what he meant. What truth? Why did it sound so ominous? What could he possibly be hiding from her? Before she could ask another question, the car swerved violently, throwing them both forward. The screech of tires filled her ears as the world around her began to spin. She barely registered Peter's frantic shout before everything went black. Isabella woke to a sharp, piercing pain in her head. For a moment, everything was blurry, like waking from a deep, unrelenting sleep. Her eyelids fluttered open, and she squinted against the harsh light that filtered in through the windows. She was lying on a soft surface, the scent of antiseptic filling her nose. Her throat was dry, and her body felt heavy, as though it had been dragged through the mud. A steady beep echoed in the background, and panic gripped her chest. She turned her head and saw Peter, his face ashen, sitting in a chair beside the bed. His hands were clenched tightly in his lap, his eyes hollow and distant. She tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. Her voice cracked when she attempted to whisper his name. "Peter," she croaked. His head snapped up, and his eyes met hers, wide with both relief and fear. He stood quickly, rushing to her side. "Isabella," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "Thank God you're awake." Her pulse quickened, but something in his tone, something in his eyes, unsettled her. There was a depth of fear there that she couldn't quite understand. Peter wasn't the type to show weakness, let alone fear. His usual confident, collected self was replaced by a man who seemed to be carrying a burden he couldn't bear. "What happened?" Isabella asked, her voice stronger now, though still fragile. She looked around the sterile hospital room, confusion clouding her mind. How did she get here? The last thing she remembered was the car swerving, the screech of tires, and then, darkness. Peter's lips pressed together in a thin line, as though struggling to find the right words. He ran a hand through his hair, then turned away, pacing the length of the room. Isabella's gaze followed him, her heart pounding in her chest. "Peter, please, tell me," she said, her voice pleading. He stopped by the window, his back to her. He let out a deep breath before finally speaking, though his words were measured, controlled. "We were in an accident. A car crash. The driver lost control." His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him, flickering with something she couldn't quite place. Isabella's mind raced as she processed his words. The crash. She tried to remember. She closed her eyes, but the images were hazy. Nothing made sense. She remembered the conversation, the auction, Victoria's cruel comments, but after that, it was all a blur. How long have I been here?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. 3 days, Peter replied, his voice soft. "You've been unconscious for most of that time." 3 days. The weight of it settled in her chest, and her mind began to whirl with questions. Peter had been acting strangely at the auction, and now, this? What was he hiding? Why did he seem so different? So distant? She tried to sit up, but the pain in her head intensified, forcing her to lie back down. Her body felt weak, like a shadow of the person she had been just days ago. "Isabella, you need to rest," Peter said, his hand gently pressing against her shoulder. "The doctors said you need time to recover." But she wasn't going to rest. Not until she got answers. "Why are you acting like this?" she asked, her voice suddenly sharp. She searched his face, looking for the man she had married, the man who had been her support, her protector. But now, all she saw was a stranger, a man who seemed to be drowning in his own secrets. Peter's jaw clenched. He looked away, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Isabella, please. You don't understand." She stared at him, her heart pounding. "What don't I understand, Peter? Why do you keep pulling away from me? Why do you seem scared?" He took a step back, his hands up in defense. "I'm not scared, Isabella. I'm just trying to protect you." "Protect me?" she echoed, the confusion deepening. "From what? What's going on, Peter? What are you hiding from me?" Peter's eyes flashed, but it wasn't the anger she expected. It was something far worse: regret, guilt, and fear. "You need to forget about it, Isabella. Forget about everything. It's better if you don't know." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Forget? Forget what? What could possibly be so important that he wanted her to forget? "Tell me the truth," she demanded, sitting up again, despite the pain that throbbed in her head. "I have a right to know, Peter." He remained silent for a long moment, his back still turned to her. The tension in the room was suffocating, thick and heavy. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. The accident wasn't an accident, Isabella. It was intentional. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? Why would anyone want to hurt us? Peter finally turned to face her, his expression solemn. There's something I've been hiding from you, something I should have told you a long time ago. But I was trying to protect you from it. Isabella's heart raced. She had been married to Peter for years, but she had no idea what he was talking about. What was he hiding? What was this secret that could destroy everything? Peter, what is it? What's going on? She asked, her voice shaking. He hesitated, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. I'm not just some businessman, Isabella. I'm involved in things, dangerous things. People who would stop at nothing to get what they want. That's why we were targeted. That's why the crash happened. It wasn't a random event. A chill ran down Isabella's spine. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of his words. Dangerous things? People who would stop at nothing? Who was Peter really? Who are these people? She asked, her voice trembling. Peter closed his eyes, his face lined with exhaustion. I've made enemies over the years, Isabella. Powerful enemies. And now they've come for us. They want something, and they'll do anything to get it. Something? Isabella echoed, her mind spinning. What do they want from you? From us? Peter met her gaze, his eyes filled with a sadness she had never seen before. It's me they're after, Isabella. Not you. But you're a part of this now. I never wanted you involved, but I couldn't protect you from it anymore. Isabella sat in stunned silence. Her heart hammered in her chest. The man she had married, the man who had seemed so untouchable, so confident, was entangled in a world of danger, a world she knew nothing about. And now, somehow, she was caught up in it too. Suddenly, the door to the room opened, and a nurse stepped inside. Mr. and Mrs. Lancaster, she said softly, the doctor is here to check on Mrs. Lancaster's condition. Peter quickly stood up, his face a mask of composure once more. He gave Isabella one last, lingering look before turning to the nurse. We'll talk later, he muttered, then followed the nurse out of the room. Isabella was left alone, the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. She had always known there was something off about Peter's life, something that didn't quite add up. But she never imagined it could be this dark. As the door clicked shut behind him, Isabella closed her eyes, her mind spinning with fear, confusion, and anger. Peter had hidden so much from her, secrets that were slowly unraveling before her eyes. And now, it was too late to turn back. She was in this, whether she wanted to be or not. And the worst part? She didn't know if she could trust him anymore. Isabella sat in the sterile hospital room, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor the only sound filling the silence. The events of the past few days played in her mind like an endless loop, each fragment sharp and disorienting. The crash. Peter's cryptic words. The fear in his eyes. And most troubling of all, his admission that he was hiding something from her. Something dangerous. The door creaked open, and Peter entered, his face pale, eyes tired. He paused when he saw her sitting up, her gaze fixed on the window, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. His footsteps were heavy as he approached her bed, the tension between them thick in the air. She didn't turn to face him, though she felt the weight of his presence in the room. I'm sorry, he said quietly, his voice carrying an edge of vulnerability she hadn't heard before. I should have told you sooner. I know you deserve better than this. Isabella's heart twisted at the sincerity in his voice, but she couldn't shake the unease that had settled in her chest. She didn't know if she could trust him anymore. The man she had married seemed so distant, a stranger in his own skin. You should have, she replied, her voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of hurt. She finally turned to face him, her eyes meeting his. Why didn't you? What was so dangerous that you couldn't share it with me? Peter's face tightened, and he sat down in the chair beside her. He took a deep breath, his hand running through his disheveled hair. I thought I could protect you. But I can't. Not from this. Isabella raised an eyebrow, her patience beginning to wear thin. Protect me from what? You've been lying to me, Peter. I need the truth, not more excuses. Peter's eyes flickered with regret, and for a moment, he was silent, his gaze distant as if wrestling with an internal battle. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and filled with resignation. I'm not just a businessman, Isabella, he said, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of sorrow and guilt. I've been involved with people, dangerous people, for years. They have their hands in things you wouldn't believe. And I've been trying to get out, but it's not that simple. There's no way out once you're in. Isabella felt a chill run down her spine as she listened to him. Dangerous people? She had never imagined that the man she had loved and trusted could be entangled in something so dark. Her mind raced with questions, each one more unsettling than the last. How long has this been going on? She asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to remain composed. Years, Peter answered quietly. Longer than you think. I was young when I got involved, but as time went on, I realized just how deep it went. It's not just business. It's power. Influence. And they'll do anything to keep it. Isabella's mind spun as she processed his words. The life she had known, her comfortable, secure life, was built on a foundation of lies. Peter had been hiding secrets from her for their entire marriage, secrets that now seemed to be unraveling at a terrifying pace. But why now? Why did they come after us? She asked, her voice sharp. Why the crash? Why put our lives in danger? Peter looked down at his hands, as though searching for an answer that wasn't there. Because I tried to leave, he said softly, his voice heavy with regret. I thought I could walk away. But once you're in, there's no walking away. They'll come for you. They'll take everything, your family, your friends, your life. I thought I could keep you safe, but I failed. Isabella's heart tightened at the raw emotion in his words. She could see the toll this life had taken on him, the weight of years of secrecy and fear. But at the same time, she felt betrayed. Everything she had believed in, everything she had thought she knew about her husband, had been shattered in an instant. Peter, I need you to tell me everything, she said, her voice unwavering. Who are these people? What do they want from you? From us? Peter's eyes were clouded with fear. They're not just criminals, Isabella. They're powerful. They have connections everywhere, politicians, businessmen, law enforcement. You wouldn't believe the reach they have. And they're after something. Something I have, or something they think I have. Isabella's pulse quickened as she tried to make sense of what he was saying. What do they think you have? Peter closed his eyes, his face contorted with pain. It's not something I can explain. Not yet. But it's dangerous. If they find out where it is, they'll stop at nothing to get it. That's why I couldn't tell you. I was trying to protect you. But now, I don't know if I can. Isabella's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle slowly beginning to fit together. Peter had been hiding something, something valuable enough to put their lives in jeopardy. And whatever it was connected to these dangerous people, this web of power and corruption that seemed to stretch beyond anything she could have imagined. As the weight of his words sank in, she felt a cold, creeping sense of dread settle in her chest. She had always thought of her life as ordinary, predictable. But now, it was anything but. She had been thrust into a world she didn't understand, a world that threatened everything she held dear. Peter stood up, running a hand through his hair, his face filled with frustration. I didn't want you involved in this, Isabella. I thought I could keep you safe. But now, I don't know if I can. We need to leave. We need to get out of here, before they come for you too. Leave? Isabella repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. Peter, you can't just run. We need to confront this. We need to figure out what's going on. What do they want, and why me? Peter's face tightened, and he looked at her with a mixture of fear and sorrow. You don't understand. They've already found us. They know who you are. It's too late. The words hit Isabella like a punch to the stomach. Too late? What did he mean by that? She felt the walls closing in, the weight of his secrets pressing down on her, suffocating her. Just then, the door to the room opened again, and a man stepped inside. Isabella froze as she recognized him, David. One of Peter's closest associates. His presence sent a chill through her. Peter, we need to talk, David said, his voice low and urgent. Peter's face tightened, but he nodded, stepping toward the door. I'll be back in a moment, he said to Isabella, though his eyes were filled with uncertainty. As he left, Isabella was left alone, her thoughts a whirl of confusion and fear. What was happening? What had she gotten herself into? And most importantly, how much danger were they really in? She glanced at the door, the dark shadows of doubt creeping into her mind. Peter had always been the one to protect her, the one to keep her safe. But now, she wasn't so sure. Now, she had to wonder if the man she had trusted had been hiding his true self all along. And as the minutes passed, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything she thought she knew about her life, about her marriage, was about to come crashing down. Isabella sat on the edge of the bed, the hospital room still and suffocating. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of medical machines. She had waited for Peter to return, for him to explain the cryptic message David had delivered, but the hours stretched on with no sign of him. The tight knot of anxiety in her chest twisted painfully as she watched the clock on the wall. It felt like a lifetime had passed since the last conversation, since the moment when Peter had said he was trying to protect her. But all she could think about was how everything she knew about their life together seemed to have been a lie. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and Peter stepped inside. He looked disheveled, his suit wrinkled, his hair messier than usual. His face was drawn, his eyes filled with exhaustion and something darker, fear. He looked at Isabella with a mixture of regret and desperation. I'm sorry, I didn't want you to be dragged into this, Peter said, his voice barely above a whisper. He walked toward her slowly, his shoulders heavy with the weight of his words. I thought I could keep you safe, but now I realize I've put you in even greater danger. Isabella's heart raced as she stood, her emotions a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and anger. She had waited all day, hoping for answers, but all she received was more uncertainty. More secrets. What do you mean? What did David say? She demanded, her voice firm despite the panic rising within her. Why haven't you told me everything? Peter took a deep breath, his gaze avoiding hers for a moment before meeting her eyes again. I never wanted you involved in this, Isabella. But it's too late for that now. They're coming for us. For both of us. The words landed like a punch to the gut. They? Who were they? And why were they after them? What do they want? Isabella asked, her voice trembling. What do they want from you? From us? Peter closed his eyes, as though the weight of his words was too much for him to bear. They want what I've been hiding from you. What I've been hiding from everyone. Isabella felt her heart skip a beat. The tension in the room was suffocating, and she could feel the air grow heavy with anticipation. She needed the truth. Needed to understand everything, even if it meant facing the darkest parts of their lives. "Peter, I'm not leaving until you tell me everything," she said, her voice more resolute now. "All of it. No more lies." He nodded slowly, stepping closer to her. "Okay," he said softly. "But this isn't just about me. It's about you too." Isabella's stomach churned. What was he talking about? How was she involved in this mess? "I've been involved with people who operate in the shadows," Peter continued, his voice low. "They're powerful, too powerful. They have money, influence, connections. People who control things, who manipulate events, make decisions from the shadows. And they've been after me for years." Isabella felt the floor beneath her shift, the ground cracking open beneath the weight of Peter's words. She tried to steady herself, but the enormity of what he was saying was almost too much to comprehend. "But what do they want from you?" she asked again, her voice quiet now, almost pleading. Peter exhaled slowly, his face shadowed with guilt and fear. "They think I have something. A key. A piece of information that can change everything. A piece of information that could bring down everything they've built. And they will stop at nothing to get it." Isabella shook her head, trying to make sense of it. "A key? What key? What was Peter involved in? What is this key? What does it do?" Peter's gaze hardened. "I can't explain it all, Isabella. Not yet. But it's dangerous. If they get it, they will have all the power they need to control everything, every person, every nation, every piece of information." The gravity of his words hung in the air like a thick fog. Isabella could feel her mind racing, trying to piece together the fragments of this puzzle, but the picture was too complicated, too elusive. It was like trying to catch smoke with her bare hands. "Peter," she whispered, her voice breaking through the silence. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you trust me?" Peter's face contorted with regret, his eyes filled with pain. "I was trying to protect you. You wouldn't have been safe if you knew. I thought if I could just get away from them, from all of this, we could have a normal life. But it doesn't work that way. There's no such thing as normal anymore." Isabella's heart shattered as the weight of his words settled in. He had kept secrets from her, big, life-changing secrets, and in doing so, he had dragged her into a dangerous world that she couldn't escape from. The betrayal stung more than the fear she felt now. The love she had once shared with Peter was tainted, eroded by years of lies and half-truths. But in that moment, something deep inside Isabella shifted. She couldn't change the past. She couldn't undo the years of deceit. But she could choose how to move forward. And she wouldn't let herself be a victim anymore. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm brewing within her. Peter looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and hope. "We have to leave. We have to disappear. If we stay, they'll find us. If they find us." Before he could finish his sentence, the door to the room swung open, and David stepped inside, his expression grim. Behind him, two men, strangers to Isabella, stood, their faces cold, unreadable. "Peter, it's too late," David said, his voice filled with urgency. "They're already here." Isabella felt her breath catch in her throat as the men stepped forward, their presence almost suffocating. One of them, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, locked eyes with her. "This is it," David continued, his voice tense. "They've found us." Peter stood, his posture rigid, his face pale. "No," he said, his voice low but filled with defiance. "I won't let them take her." Isabella's heart raced as the tension in the room grew. These men, who were they? And what did they want with her? "We have no choice," Peter said, his eyes flickering toward David. "We need to go now. It's the only way to keep her safe." The man with the scar stepped forward, his hand resting on a gun holstered at his side. "I'm afraid it's already too late for that," he said coldly. There's no escaping them now. Peter turned to Isabella, his face filled with determination. I'm sorry, he whispered. But we have to fight. Isabella's world tilted as the events she had feared began to unfold before her eyes. She had thought she was trapped in a nightmare before, but this was something far worse. The stakes were higher now. There was no turning back.